The conversations around Hashinals on Hedera, and I don't want to spend too much time on this. I just wanted to share some thoughts. I think that Hashinals are very interesting. And if you're not familiar with it, basically Hashinals are maybe pulling back a little bit. So when we talk about Hashinals, and we'll keep it pretty simple, we're talking about NFTs. And I know that there are other things you can do, but we're going to just keep it really simple. And so when we think about NFTs and we think about the stuff inside of an NFT, like the metadata or the picture or the video or the object or whatever it is, where is that stuff actually stored, right? Is it stored in the NFT? And it's not. There are services like IPFS and then also Arweave that host these files for these NFTs. So when you have an NFT on Hedera and you have an image and all these different assets, effectively the NFT is linking to these assets on these services. And there have been troubles with IPFS because these different services rely on incentivizing people with hard drives essentially to keep files on those hard drives, pay for those power bills to keep those hard drives not spinning. It's not 2004 still, but like keep those hard drives and servers active so people can access those files from a decentralized network of storage. And with IPFS, we've noticed a lot of less popular Hedera NFTs go blank, essentially, right? You open your wallet and they're just not there because you can't see the files inside of it because the connection is no longer there. Whichever group has been incentivized to store those files no longer feels incentivized to do that. The decentralized nature of it. And then there is the comparison of like, well, if you pay for, host the files on Google and you pay for it yourself, then sure, they'll be up forever. But what happens if, something happens with Google? So there's all these, it's bubbling into this thing of like, what is the actual solution? Like, what is the way to permanently store files, whether it's a couple kilobytes or whether it's a gigabyte? Like how do we do this? And the solutions have been really interesting. Like Arweave is a very interesting solution. It's like essentially like a new network specifically designed for file storage. Great alternative to IPFS and especially like just centralized storage or like hosting on AWS or whatever. So really great. But then something interesting happened, which was ordinals, right, on Bitcoin. And what that meant was files themselves could be inscribed onto the actual blockchain. So the files were actually hosted on chain. And what that meant was as long as Bitcoin exists, you can access those files, which is very, chaotic and fun and appealing. And it led to billions of dollars of value being moved through ordinals, as we saw, and all other networks doing their own flavor of inscriptions on Solana and Cardano and this and that. And at its core, ordinals, right, what Hashinals is based off of, it's kind of stupid, right? I mean, the concept of it, all that kind of stuff is like, if you were to sit down with a blank paper and outline what the perfect or what a really good on-chain storage solution would look like, it wouldn't look like, I don't think, ordinals or Hashinals or whatever. But that's not what it's about. And generally, this isn't how software development works. Like software development is pretty chaotic, and it just kind of is organic and flows wherever the money goes, And so with ordinals, that's just what it was about. Is it just happened to catch fire, got really popular. Now it's a thing. Now it's a technology. It's a protocol. And what Hashinals is about is I don't think it's so much about, at least in the onset, I don't think really what it was about is like, let's build some kind of new big thing, some breakthrough thing that's going to be the best storage solution on, Hedera. I think more so what it was about is like, okay, this massive thing is happening now in crypto with on-chain storage. How do we not mess this up again? How do we get Hedera into the discussion? And we do that through doing our own flavor of ordinals, right? Hashinals. And so this was an initiative from, we've seen Patches and Michael from Tierbot working on this. And that's essentially what it is it's a, initiative to store files on Hedera. So now let's go a little level deeper. Like, what does that mean? So what it means is you leverage HCS, the consensus service that you can submit messages to, like Atma.io uses it and they submit messages to it. And to store a file on it, you take the file, you convert it to base 64, which is it's basically just like text that if you have a file in like, let's say in 10,000 lines of text, if you then encode it or decode it from base 64, you'll get the file, right? So if it's just text, then that means what you can do is you can take that big, long base 64 string of this giant file, and you can write that sequentially to a bunch of HCS messages, like maybe it's a couple hundred or a couple thousand. And so when you have an application to read those series of HCS messages, you can get all the pieces and assemble it and then get the file. And the appeal is similar to Bitcoin with ordinals, is that obviously is recorded to HCS. It's stored on the Hedera network. And so that's something that's really exciting. So I think that there's a discussion right now that's pretty exciting to see about data on Hedera. An energetic discussion, but one that I just want to share some thoughts on, which is, I think a key criticism of Hashinals is like, when you write that much information to Hedera, the information isn't stored on the Hedera consensus nodes, right? That information is stored on mirror nodes, and mirror nodes, sometimes the data for mirror nodes are sometimes hosted on Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud. At Hgraph, we also have like our own hardware infrastructure. So we actually, have, server machines and, data centers and all that kind of stuff. So there are all sorts of different ways of doing it. Hedera runs their own mirror node as well. And when you look at the Hedera network and the amount of information on it, the mirror nodes, the data is like dozens of terabytes, right? So it's a lot of information. And I would say that most of that, 90% of that is Atma.io transactions. That's the thing is, if a concern is the scalability of storage on Hedera, the reality is that most of that is Atma.io transactions, right? And that's what really places the pressure on mirror nodes, is those 1,500 transactions per second that mirror node providers, that like I work at Hgraph, that we store. I don't really know how many people right now need to get access to Atma.io transactions. But I do know a lot of people that want access to Hashinals transactions. So the incentive for mirror node providers to host Hashinals transactions and information is much higher than Atma.io, again, which is like most of the space taken up right now on mirror nodes. And there will be other Atma.ios. Like the storage requirements for Hedera are going to continue growing and growing and growing and growing. And so I think that the core of it can kind of get lost a little bit. And I think there's a few different points being raised. And I just, again, want to just share my quick thoughts. It's like, if the conversation is about, is Hashinals a good alternative to IPFS? Is it a good way to store data? Who knows? I mean, Hashinals is based off of ordinals. Is ordinals great? I don't think so from a technical standpoint. The reality is, though, is that it's a massive economy. It's critical from a retail perspective to get Hedera as part of that conversation. And also understand that even if this dumb thing such as ordinals is applied on Hedera in the form of Hashinals, turns out that Hedera is like way better at doing inscriptions, like way better. And then when you think about people porting their ordinals over to Hedera and back and forth, and Hedera becoming a trust layer of these other ordinals networks and making them more efficient, all these different types of things. There's all sorts of different crazy opportunities. So from that point, it's not, from the Hashinals point, it's not so much about like Hashinals is so amazing and so great and is a great alternative to IPFS. It's more so this is getting Hedera in the discussion. And along the way, we've discovered that, okay, wow. So this Hashinals thing on Hedera, it turns out there's a bunch of other stuff we can do with it because of the way the network is set up. And those things are not possible on other networks. So it's this natural line of curiosity. It's this natural hacker culture. Like, this is the cornerstone of retail that's exciting. And it's like, also too, it's just another option. Now you can use IPFS, ARweave, or Hashinals, or all three if you want. Like, it's good to have choices. Now, if the conversation is about scalability of storage on Hedera and the sustainability of Hashinals, then we really kind of have to look at stuff holistically and go, what's the real concern here? Like, if the concern is Hashinals generates too much, like too many transactions or take up too much storage, you kind of go, well, if we're talking about the scalability of storage on Hedera, like Hashinals is not really in the conversation at this point when it comes to storage. Like, it doesn't have really an impact on the network. And like I said, the impact is enterprise use cases like Atma.io, right? Submitting all those transactions. That's where the real burden is on mirror nodes. Mirror nodes are burdened with having to store all of these Atma.io transactions. That is essentially a product that these mirror nodes have that nobody really wants other than Atma.io. So that's where the real burden is. On the inverse, Hashinals transactions and all this kind of stuff, there's much more incentive for mirror node hosts to provide this Hashinals data because people are using it in the retail community. So I think there's a bit of disconnect in the conversation of, like, again, if the conversation's about the sustainability of data access and storage on the Hedera network, and the fact that as more mirror node providers come into the fray, they're going to have to pick and choose the information they want to store. It's far more likely they're going to want to store Hashinals transactions over Atma.io transactions because it's just a minuscule impact. And I mean, at Hgraph, we store everything from Genesis, and we're in a good position now, having done that. So that's really great. And the other thing too is, like, even though all of this info isn't stored on consensus nodes, if you have the data, right, the whole point of consensus nodes is you're going to be able to check that data against the hashes on the consensus nodes and confirm that it is the actual data, and then you're good to go. So, and also Hedera hosts their own mirror node. So we do also have the data accessible. If, for example, all mirror node providers were to disappear at this early stage, it's not the end of the world. So I think that, if the conversation is about, about the sustainability and scalability of storage on Hedera, I think that, again, Hashinals isn't really a huge part of that conversation. The conversation for me is more, what do we do when the next Atma.io comes? What do we do when the next 1,000, 2,000 TPS comes? What do we do at that point? And knowing that that's just something we're going to have to tackle head on, and we're just going to have to deal with it. Like, that's what scaling the network is. And a big portion of that is like, hey, hello, Atma.io. It'd be great if you're going to be hammering the network and mirror nodes with all these transactions. It'd be awesome if we could get a little support on that. Or if we thought more about the other side of the network, like I talked about. If we're going to be storing so much data on the network, it would be really awesome to factor that into some of these grants, or factor that into some of these supports. Like, if we're going to be giving grants to Atma.io to pay for transactions going into the network, we should also be providing support to mirror node providers to incentivize them to hold that information, because as it continues to grow, I think that's going to be an important thing to factor in. And I think that that's a hump that if we can get over it, it doesn't take much, I don't think, to get over that hump. It just puts us in a much better position. So that's the other thing. And then if the conversation again is about, like, we've got ARweave, we've got IPFS, like, why do we need Hashinals? It's like, it goes right back to the core of this discussion, which is, why do we need ordinals? We don't really, but we do because tons of people use them and it's seen crazy spikes. So it's that tough thing to turn away something that is picking up steam. And I think that hits at the core of a lot of the mistakes that Hedera has made, right? Commonly, as a community and as an ecosystem and as organizations in this ecosystem, we'll see something exciting happen in the crypto industry and we'll go, well, that doesn't make any sense. That's not technically feasible. That's whatever. And we kind of poo-poo it. And then, time goes by and it's like, oh, it made the network a bajillion dollars. And and it's just, we always go, oh, why didn't we get involved? Why didn't we do that? And so I think that that's the reason I'm supportive of Hashinals as someone who works at a mirror node provider, is because this is, at this point, a fairly low impact way to, get in this conversation. And I think that, I don't see a ton of negatives at this point. I think that when we talk about the sustainability of the network, it's a much broader conversation. But those are my two